Chad Blake, the man with the moniker of the Dark Mix, does some cool stuff on his mix bus in terms of automation that I don't think a lot of people think about. I want to show you what it is. All right, so this is kind of another video on his mix bus. I made one in the past that breaks down specifically what's on it, so I'm not going to do the same thing in this one, so I'll put a link up to check that out, but these are different things. So he'll take Master Desk. Let's look at this. Now, the order of where the stuff is sitting, he has Master Desk as his fourth to last plugin, okay? And then right before that is the Meta Flanger. He will automate both of these to give different parts of the song more of a vibe or presence or get wider. You know, he is a big fan of making things feel like they're outside of the speakers. So on Master Desk, his go-to for automation is the Stereo Enhance knob. He will often take this, so you just double click in here, that the box within a box, and you go find your Stereo Enhance, all right, which is right here. It's on that STENH, like enhance, but it's abbreviated. So once you've selected that in there, then you come down here and you can easily go to the Master Desk, Stereo Enhance, and you could draw in, you know, maybe this is where your chorus happens. Boom. Now you lifted up the chorus. So when you get to this section of the song, all of a sudden you're at 59% Stereo Enhance or 43, or pick a number, any number, you know what I'm saying? But the rest of the time you can bring it down to some other number. So now we're over here and we're sitting at 5%. So that means your verse can be more focused, your chorus or something can get super wide. A lot of people, I don't think, automate the Stereo Enhance. I found it interesting that he does, and it's something that I'm going to be trying in the future, absolutely. Now, when it comes to this right here, we have the Meta Flanger. What I noticed was the rate is super slow, and he will automate the mix. So you see this mix one right here? As you turn this up, he'll just a little bit. This is a good thing to use in like transition sections. So basically you click the one that's, I clicked rate and I clicked mix, but what we want is really the mix over here. See that mix? Automate that, because just by automating the mix button, that means that just like in the other way where we selected this, we're going to meta flange, mix, and now you want to bring up maybe just a transition. It could be a very small section, like just like a couple seconds when a part changes from, you know, the pre-chorus is ending and it's kind of a build or something. Put it there. Put like a ramp up, put a ramp down. You know, my goal for a video like this is to get a lot of things out for the people who want to get ideas to try on their own stuff. It's not really about whether something works on a particular song I'm showing you. So let's move on. Meta Flanger, automating the mix knob, but I wanted to mention also the rate. See this rate thing right here? That rate, if I crank the rate up, look at how fast it moves. That almost gets too crazy fast. He has it so slow. Look at that thing just creeping. You know, like moving at a little tiny click of a pace, like 0.04 or 0.03, like real slow. And just that in and of itself gives you a bit of vibe. Now, you could automate that too if you want. Automate the rate if you want it to sound like it's getting slower and speeding up. All right, so keeping these things in mind, what I also want to mention is how loud he goes into his mix bus. Now, he's mentioned this, that the way he looks at tracks in his song, like with like the clips themselves, okay, he looks at that like they should be way lower than you would think they should be, because in his mind, it chokes the sound on every level. On his mixes, they look like this. They look super low. Now, you could obviously make this look however you want, even if it's super low. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But basically, he comes into his mix bus at -12. All his tracks, by the way, are super low like this because he thinks the plugins work better when they have substantially more headroom. So this is a guy who came from using a desk. He loved mixing desks and analog gear. And then he starts using in digital. And what he's realizing is, it's not about how to make a plugin sound like a piece of analog gear. It's about using the plugins as new tools. So this concept lives within him. He doesn't want his Pultec plugin, for example, to sound like a real Pultec. He just looks at it like a tool. So that was his big thing that I took a lot out of, actually, is when he said people put a history to the plugins because they make the GUIs look like the hardware. But they shouldn't, because they're different tools. They don't sound the same. Sometimes maybe they get close, but they're not the same. So you shouldn't be thinking this doesn't sound like this. You should be using it as a new tool, even though it looks like an old tool. And that's the point, I think, that you should take with you, is that they don't work the same. So whereas in the analog world, the thing so many people like is you could hit the things very hard. Now, where I used to think analog was the best, and I used to swear by it. I don't believe any of that anymore. What I believe is you just have to work differently in order to achieve that. And the reason I believe that is because I found through doing less on a bunch of plugins, I can get it to sound way more like I want, which is a totally different way to work than take a piece of analog gear and hit it really hard. And then you have a sweet spot that's much bigger. You have more forgiveness on all sides with analog. Yeah, I agree with that. So working in the box, you just have to work differently in order to achieve a result that you like. Now, some people, will say they think I'm downplaying how good things are with gear. I don't think so. It's a mental thing. You are convinced that one is way better than another. I'm not convinced. So you can be convinced. I am not convinced. And I used to be convinced. So that should tell you that through enough time of doing this, you will have a different way of thinking if you might allow yourself to. So the way I look at this, right? All these plugins that I put, every single one is going to add something to the sound. And if I come in too hot, if my metering is blasted out, it's not going to work as well down the line or at any given moment in time. So at any given plugin stage, at any given track stage. So he comes in very low. He literally lowers the clip gain on most of his stuff so that it is looking like this, like super low, so that he has enough headroom within the plugin so it never sounds choked. And then when he gets to his mix bus, he's at -12. Now, if you don't know what -12 is, you look at a meter like this. You see this? -12 is sitting over here, which is roughly where on the left side where the 0 sits for where your fader movement is. This is very similar to where the 0 sits. That's approximately where -12 is. So just so everyone's on the same page, if you know what that looks like, that means you're coming in the meter roughly about here where my mouse is. That means you're metering. You should be aware of this when you're hitting your mix bus. You turn everything off. That's how loud you're coming in there in order for the rest of the processing to work. At any given stage, he could crank up and turn the plugins up to achieve more level. But by coming in at a low enough level, it allows the plugins to work at their best. So this is something I mentioned in the last video. He puts Studer on, but why he uses this is also interesting. He'll use this on a setting he has never used in real life on the real gear. Like, for example, he used to use an Ampeg set at 15 IPS at +6, and he would basically get, and Dolby SR. And that was his setting, 1/4 inch. That was his setting on the real gear. When it comes to the plugin, he wasn't able to get the plugin dialed in that way to sound anything like that. So he tried the ATR, he tried Kramer tape. What he settled on was the A800 at GP9, 30 IPS. And what he said was, he's like, I've never used GP9 tape in my life. So the point is, he's using a setting he would never use, like the GP9 tape he's never used. He's going to set this to GP9, and he's going to set it to 30 IPS because at +6, and this gave him the perceived low-end thing he was able to achieve that he liked, that what it was doing to the low end on the way he used to work, 1/4 inch, Dolby SR, 15 IPS. He was able to achieve that by setting this a completely different way. And that's, I think, that in a nutshell is what it means to, like, these are new tools. That's what it means. It means they're not the same tools. You can't look at them like the same thing, but you have to go into it knowing kind of what you want, or at least knowing when you hear it, so you can tweak like crazy and be like, oh, I like that. At least knowing what you like or want, just so you can then park yourself on a setting you've never ever used before or heard anybody, use, or like that's the kind of thing he's doing. All right. So also keep in mind the ML4 is his signature kind of thing. He's always used. I think he said he's used it on like every mix, and he keeps all the settings on compression. See, comp. So basically, he's rocking the compression settings on this thing. So he's not using it for the gate or the expander, but he is using it for the compression. And I find this interesting because that thing has such a sound that you won't mix the same if you put that on your mix bus and then mix into it. You just won't. It's just very aggressive. It has its own flavor, and every decision you make along the way is going to be informed by that. So, as he's going, what I notice he'll do sometimes is he will crank, like if he wants output level, a lot of times the Studer, right, will be hitting very short of zero. So you see where the zero line is? Like, what I was playing with this, I liked how it sounded in here. And then what I wound up doing was kind of checking out what he was doing again. And it was really a lot less of a level. It was in here most of the time on the low end of the meter, which just speaks to his concept of he's always going in, like he's getting quieter than you think. But then I was like, where does he turn up? He turns up on his EQ. This will sometimes provide some makeup gain for him, so he could be cranking this pretty substantially. And if he's coming in a little too hot for the Studer, I've seen him take down the input level as well. So there's a lot of different things you could do to kind of control the level getting in, but -12 is a big, like that's way lower than I think most people get into their mix bus, and that's what he's doing. And then the automation is key, and he's turning on things like Master Desk after about a half hour to an hour of mixing. Like once he gets into it for a little bit, then he'll turn on Master Desk, but he doesn't do it from jump. And he also has an SSL comp after it, and I mean, I've seen him do all sorts of stuff from 4-to-1 to 10-to-1, rarely, but he'll hit a 10-to-1 sometimes. It worked better on that particular song. This wasn't him, but I've seen people do like a reverb on their mix bus and then automate it for a part of the song to kind of take it into a new world. So if you want like a weird, ethereal part to just get sort of crazy on you and do it to the whole mix, they're doing it on their mix bus. So they're automating a reverb, wet dry from nothing to like a lot all of a sudden, just to change the feel completely. It's like a brand new scene in a movie, and then all of a sudden it's like a flashback, and then go bring it back to where it was before you get back into the song. Another thing I've seen people do, not him, they'll automate the filters. So in order to get that same kind of feeling where, like automating a stereo enhance thing, what you can do is automate your high pass and low pass filters on your mix bus. Just basically set up, you could set up 2 different EQ1 bands or do it with the EQ7 band or like just anything. It doesn't need anything special. And just sort of tighten up, lose some bottom end, lose some top end, and then bring it back in the chorus. That's really it. Just automate those on and off. Very interesting. So, if I was going to do that, I would do it with an EQ that did both at the same time instead of having like one channel of, automation on this EQ1 band and then another one with another thing. I wouldn't do that. I would put it on one. So I'd probably use like an EQ7 band or something to do that. As soon as you hit a plugin too hard, there's a problem. And that should be the theme of this video. That's why you're lowering your clips to get lower than you think every step of the way so that when they get in here, you're okay. And if you have to, you use a limiter to bring up level at the end, or you do it on like your last EQ like he was doing here, happy to do that. Also, in terms of the settings here, he's usually doing a similar thing where low end is boosted around, getting a little back around 60, not a whole lot, but just a little bit of low end boost, which is a shelf, a little bit of high end boost around, what is that, like 16.4? And he did mention this. He likes that super high end boost, like 17, 18K. That's his thing. I love that. I like hearing stuff like this because I think so many people, they park their high end around 8K or something, and it's like they don't see the need to go up higher than that. I like that he's a fan of boosting 17, 18K. I always found on the Fusion, it's nice to go to 18 and crank a bit. It brings a lot of interesting life on there, especially because you got the high frequency compressor that you can sort of use on there in tandem with doing that. So it's pretty cool. Anyway, mixing's the best. You guys got this. Have fun. So much stuff to do. Any questions, throw them in the comments. Anything else you want to hear in terms of maybe explanations on anything that I went over too fast or something, let me know. Questions, answers, throw it in there. I appreciate it. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.